Happy Friday. It's February 8th, 2019. This is a Dodger Game broadcast of a Mormon Truth video coming to you from the jungles today. Anyway, today's going to be about Joseph Smith and the Mormons, witchcraft and occultism in Mormonism. I'm actually going to be reading a web page written by a former member of the church who is very versed in the occult and will give us some perspective on LDS theology and history from one who is very experienced in the occult, because there are many similarities that are just not recognized by the average person. Pictures you're seeing are from the video Unveiling the Mystery of Secret Mormon History, and that's found on Mormon Truth Video's Gospel Topics Hub. Right there on the home page, probably about the third or fourth video down, I think. I'm just going to begin reading. We're following up on, a couple days ago, uploaded the one on Satanic ritual abuse in the church as described by Bishop Glenn L. Pace of the presiding bishopric of the church, who tells us that many people are just, he didn't use the word program, but so programmed that they actually think this is make-believe. And he found that to be an issue for many people reporting satanic ritual abuse to priesthood leaders in the church. Of course, they were reporting against priesthood leaders and young women's leaders as well, who were Satanists and had ritually abused these people as children, including the fact that many of them, 75% of them basically, that Glenn interviewed, were forced to either participate in or view human sacrifice, which is a part of Satanism, and Satanism is really big in the Wasatch Front there in Utah, according to Elder Pace. All of these people were subjected to satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control as a part of Satanism in generational satanic families in general, is what was found to be the case. And all done by temple recommend holding active members of the church, some in positions of, middle management in the church, bishops, stake presidency, stake president, patriarch, temple workers, members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, etc. And Mormonism is based in the occult. It's just that your average Latter-day Saint has no idea because they're not educated in the occult these days. Okay. Except by the assimilation of doctrines and rituals which originate therefrom. I'm going to begin to read. I'm on Lifestyles of the Traditional Witch.wordpress.com. That is where this person published this. It says it was originally posted by Lucifer's Grotto on November 10th, 2013. Yeah, sounds like this person is knows what they're talking about. All right, this is their world. Former Mormon. The Mormon Church, also known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is steeped in the occult, and its founder, Joseph Smith, was a practitioner of witchcraft and a black magician who used his knowledge and abilities for nefarious purposes. As an occult researcher, the Mormons are a part of the foundation of my own lifelong interests in the subject of witchcraft and occultism, including black magic. I formally escaped the cult in the early 1980s. I don't use the word escape lightly because this is not an organization that simply lets members walk away without a struggle. In fact, there are people who are being stalked all across the country by members of this organization who undoubtedly have connections to federal agencies because of their ability to track both members and ex-members. Mormons are highly sought after by the CIA and FBI because of their deeply conditioned obedience to authority. When I attended BYU, the fact that the CIA recruited on campus was a source of great pride to Mormons, who naively believe that they are being sought out for their high moral character. I've heard that type of thing. It is only fair to note that most practicing Mormons know nothing of the occult origins of Mormonism. Mormons do not consider the beings associated with the alleged discovery of the treasure of the golden plates to be in any way demonic. Most of them do not know the full story of what led up to this alleged event, nor do they associate the mystical practices of early Mormons with witchcraft, although any occultist and any ordinary variety Christian would certainly recognize them as such. The modern Mormon Church is very mystical and engages in practices similar to those found in modern witchcraft cults like Wicca. In fact, a surprising number of Mormon women become Wiccans after leaving the Mormon Church because of the similarities of ritual and belief in a Mother in Heaven, who is the wife of God the Father. Another reason for their attraction to Wicca is that Mormonism is deeply misogynistic. So many women find psychological and spiritual healing in Wicca in the practice of witchcraft in general. In other words, it's something much more empowering to women. It's kind of the opposite of the priesthood holding all the power. Doesn't mean a man can't be a witch. As we read, Bill Schnellbaum was a druid and a witch and a high priest in the LDS Church, attending the temple and so forth. Yeah, in fact, we're going to be having, hopefully, I'm going to be chatting with a fellow who leaves a lot of comments all over on YouTube, and is active LDS, was a Wiccan, I believe. Richard, come on, I know his name. Anyway, some of our viewers have interacted with him. Some don't like him because he has an opposing view, but I'm not sure he's a bad guy. I think he's probably somebody that really tries to do what he thinks is right. Yeah, well, he said he'll do a live interview and we can discuss our differences. We've had some serious differences in the comment section. Let's continue. Joseph Smith Jr. was the founder of Mormonism, which originated in New York, near Palmyra, in the 1820s and 30s. This was about the time that Maggie and Kate Fox, aka the Fox sisters, the founders of the spiritualist movement, began hearing mysterious rappings. In fact, this occurred only a few miles away from the area in which young Joseph Smith lived. So you could say that witchcraft and the supernatural were sort of in the air there. Historically, Joseph Smith's family was no stranger to the belief of witchcraft. Although this was not uncommon, especially in the 17th century, Salem, Massachusetts, which is where some of Smith's ancestors came from. We've all heard of the Salem witch trials, haven't we? In fact, it was the testimony of Joe Smith Sr.'s great-grandfather, Samuel Smith, that led to the death of at least one innocent young girl in Salem. Frederick G. Mailer, The Early Days of Mormonism, Lippincott's Magazine, 26 August 1880, page 198, is the reference. Treasure hunting and Joseph Smith's Jupiter Talisman is our next section here. Continuing, both Joseph Smith Jr. and Joseph Smith Sr. were avid treasure hunters. They were also ceremonial magicians who engaged in rituals, scrying, and divination. Smith used a talisman and invoked spirits that are very familiar to many modern witches and students of the occult today. An image of the Jupiter Talisman, or seal of Jupiter, taken off the body of Joseph Smith when he was shot dead in an attempt to escape Carthage jail, is shown on the website. What is the Jupiter Talisman? A Jupiter Talisman, also called the Seal of Jupiter or the Jupiter Pentacle, is a talisman representing the influences of Jupiter: success, money, power in the world, and power over women. Jupiter's influence is one of expansion and greatness. The talisman aids the magician in finding treasure, and the one who carries it has the power to make others love him and give him whatever he asks for. How convenient for Joseph Smith. The talisman seems to have worked very well for Smith, except for that day, who almost seems to have made a Faustian pact with the spirits, given the violent and untimely nature of his death. The talisman brought him power, money, and success. In 1842, he became the mayor of the city of Nauvoo, Illinois, and his followers remained loyal to him despite all the evidence of fraud. One of the Jupiter Talisman's abilities is to bestow power over women and to make others give you whatever you ask of them. It is not exactly how many wives It is not known exactly how many wives he had, although 31 are documented. 2 of them, Nancy Winchester and Helen Mar Kimball, daughter of Heber C. Kimball, one of the apostles, were only 14 years old, at least one of whom he pretended to adopt as his own daughter. That was the former. Some of his wives were married to other men, about 11, who, according to Smith's doctrines, have the right to give them to other men if they wish. See the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Genealogical Library record for Joseph Smith Jr. and his wives. Update. Upon this date, July 25th, 2012, the author of this article learned that the LDS Genealogical Library at Ancestry.com has recently removed information about Smith's child wives. This information can still be found on wivesofjosephsmith.org. Yeah. Okay. There we go. I thought it was on, what's the name of that website? I know what it is. Okay. Click the following to read A Widow's Tale, 1884-1896 Diary of Helen Mar by Kimball Whitney, Charles M. Hatch, and Todd M. Compton, published by Utah State University Press Publications, January 1st, 2003. Continuing, when Smith was killed in an attempt to escape Carthage jail, it is alleged that a silver-colored Jupiter talisman identical to the silver seal of Jupiter found in Francis Barrett's book, The Magus, and Cornelius Agrippa's book, 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, which will be familiar to many modern occultists, particularly students of ceremonial magic, was found on his body. According to his wife, Emma Smith, he carried this talisman with him at all times. I've shown this in various other videos. There's more to making this talisman work than you just carrying it. The spirits associated with Jupiter must be invoked at the appropriate astrological hour. It must be conducted during the day or hour Jupiter. It is probably also helpful to conduct such ceremony during either the waxing or full moon. Different hermetic organizations, grimoires, and individual magicians employ different but similar methods in invoking the spirits, which must be done regularly to increase the talisman's power. It's also known that Hiram was carrying the Holiness to the Lord magic parchment, which they had used in many of their treasure digging experiences, where they sacrificed black animals by slitting their throats with the same magic knife that they drew the magic circle around the treasure dig spot in sacrifices to the guardian demons. There are plenty of journals that list this sort of thing. In fact, Lucy Mack, Joseph's mother, discusses some of the witchcraft, but a lot of it got edited out of what she wrote with the deal she cut with Brigham Young, which divided the church, basically. All right, for readers who are unfamiliar with the medieval grimoire of Agrippa, which Smith must have had more than passing familiarity with, it contains information about the use of gemstones and herbs, and their use in witchcraft. The information in this and similar books is used in the conjuration of angels, including fallen angels, demonic entities, and elemental thought forms. Not only are there planetary talismans, but seals used in ceremonies to call upon high-ranking fallen angels, whom we occultists regard as separate and distinct entities, but which Christians generally regard as one entity known as the devil or Satan. In other words, the theology of occultists is somewhat different than in Christianity and Mormonism. So the view of various spirits, there's a different perspective. In other words, the book Angels and Demons by Dan Brown, for instance, if you understand the perspective of those who are familiar with this sort of thing, an angel and a demon is not necessarily different in all cases. They're basically just talking about, spiritual entities, and the theology is therefore not the same. That someone doesn't necessarily believe that they are all categorized as evil, as Christians tend to categorize them. All right. Some of these entities, and the figure called God the Father in Christianity is just another God, just another one of many in the pantheon. And Judaism, came from a pantheon of gods. They were not monotheistic originally. The Kabbalistic Satanism that Judaism actually proceeds from and is still practiced today, especially in places like Hollywood. All the folks with little red bracelets, did you see? Many of those are doing that for a reason. And the theology is definitely different. Okay. But that's well hidden by Christian preachers. Continuing, some of these entities are able to grant supernatural powers to the conjurer, and quite a few of them are able to tell the magician where to dig for buried treasure. Some of the entities from such grimoires have names like Lucifer and Beelzebub. In other words, this practice is at odds with all of Christianity for at least the past 1700 years. These books invoke dark magic, and often unfamiliar to or unused even by some witches, especially Wiccans who eschew all forms of black magic. So even among those of us who live and breathe in the world of the occult, some of the material in these books is considered off limits because it is associated with the dark arts. So Christians call all of this dark, but these occultists believe basically that there is an entire world out there, just like we have a world of people here, and you can't say, everyone is categorized as either good or evil. It's a black and white line. You just barely made it to heaven, or too bad you just missed and you went to hell. There are all grades of people's character, and there are all grades of spiritual entities, is what this is sounding a little bit like to me. Okay. Interestingly, some occult jewelers who sell this talisman to modern witches and ceremonial magicians advise it as Joseph Smith's advertise it as Joseph Smith's talisman. So this is a selling point to many occultists. I understand certain jewelry is cast only on full moons for how they how the results turn out. There's many jewelers that are actually in the business of creating jewelry are occultists, just like many morticians and many doctors. Actually, owners of cemeteries are Satanists. At the right of this segment is believed to be a photograph of the very same article, taken from Joseph Smith's body. It is the obverse side of Cornelius Agrippa's seal of Jupiter. Note the Kabbalistic Hebrew lettering. The practice of carrying talismans was continued by Smith's successor to the Mormon presidency, Brigham Young. Young is said to have carried a special bloodstone. I mentioned that in another video. With him whenever he was going to an unknown and potentially difficult situation. Among other things, bloodstone is used by occultists to obtain the power of invisibility. He says Smith's successor in the Mormon presidency. Well, Joseph Smith's successor in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was James Jesse Strang. And Brigham has got the church with the almost the same name. It sounds the same, but it's got the hyphen in between latter and day. And Joseph Smith's family all went to Jesse Strang's church and later formed the reorganized church after Strang was murdered in similar fashion as Joseph Smith, after making similar claims, even translating the plates of Laban. Although there still are members of that church, you can find their websites. Not a very big or good website, but I've looked at it. And the letter from Joseph Smith saying that Jesse was to take over the church should anything happen to him was accepted as authentic by all of his family, his mother, his wife, Joseph Smith, the third, of course, William Smith, the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon, the stake president of Nauvoo, the bishop of the church. All these people actually followed Strang. They didn't follow Brigham Young. Okay. And Reardon took a few folks too. So, when we say the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I used to think that meant reorganized from the church we call the LDS Church, the Brighamite Church out of Salt Lake, but that's not looking like what it was. It was they reorganized members who were formerly members of the church that continued with Brother Strang, not with Brother Brigham. The talisman, there was basically a war going on there between Emma and also Lucy Mack and Brigham over assets and things of that nature, for one thing. The talisman's power is still working its magic over the members of the church. This is a very materialistic religion concerned with personal and spiritual power over others, particularly over women. However, just recently, members are promised success if they pay their tithes. In Mormonism, a tithe is 10% of the gross annual income, which is required to attain access to the temple and the ceremonial rites which promise Mormons success in the afterlife. Mormonism is an intergenerational mind control cult, but on a spiritual level, it is more than that. The members of the Mormon Church are under a very dark spell cast by a 19th century black magician and held in place by mystics and masters of psychology today. Okay, those are statements that probably just sound completely nuts to most active Latter-day Saints who have very little knowledge of the occult, if any, and most are clueless regarding the psychological techniques used by the brethren, who appear to be very expert in the administration and use of neurolinguistic programming, often called NLP, and hypnotic language. I have some familiarity with this sort of thing, and it was something that I noticed, along with other sales techniques that were used, that sales professionals are trained in turnarounds and things. And I saw Gordon B. Hinckley using this, and I discussed and actually went point by point over his war and peace talks, or talks. One of them was actually named that, I believe, when he was convincing members of the church that it was God's will to follow George Bush and Dick Cheney to the mass murder, which has continued to go on in the Middle East, where Gordon B. Hinckley quoted the Old Testament, said that the Lord rules in the armies of the nations, and that Jesus, from the New Testament, is said not to be bringing peace, but a sword. He used the feel, felt, found technique, which I discussed in that, where he basically said, normally we don't like war and that sort of a thing, but I've found after examining the evidence that we need to follow our leaders who are much more aware of all the factors here, and we just need to trust them. And I'm going to put my sentiments, with this, in line with the Nephites who are protecting their wives and their children, their religion, yea, their all, against those Gideon robbers, with whom he associated, of course, the people of Iraq and Afghanistan, though that made absolutely no sense. And then he associated the Americans with the Nephites. Actually, the Nephites, people were being attacked innocently by these Gideon robbers, and it's pretty much opposite of what he was associating it with. Because they had no involvement in, any of the so-called 9/11, attacks, in which the buildings fell straight down demolition style, and the official story said it was Saudis, not Iraqis, and not Afghan people, other than the fellow Osama bin Laden, who hung out. Actually, he was a Saudi too. Spent some time in Afghanistan, however they say. Continuing on, the summoning of Moroni. Mormons believe that Smith was shown the location of the golden plates, which he translated into the Book of Mormon, a sort of second Bible for Mormons, with the help of the angel Moroni. Moroni is similar to the spirits of old medieval grimoires in that he has specific times during which he can be contacted. The conjuration of Moroni is said to be accomplished successfully at his appointed hours. The autumn equinox, best known to occultists and especially neo-pagans as Mabon, is September 21st and 22nd. According to Joseph Smith's writings, it appears to me, especially from what they published in the Times and Seasons, that this spirit that directed him to the plates was named Nephi. It appears that Orson Pratt changed the role from Nephi to Moroni after the death of Joseph Smith in rewriting church history. Okay, next. Shapeshifters, toads, and bloody Spanish goats. This is undoubtedly about the toad that was in the with the treasure and turned into some kind of a man-like figure and smacked Joseph upside the head. Of course, they don't give us those renditions in the Pearl of Great Price. They've sanitized it and taken all the occult stuff out of it that they could manage and still retain a similar story. There are conflicting, although equally bizarre, tales regarding the discovery of the golden plates. Many historians claim there is even more to the story of Joseph Smith finding his golden treasure. The location of this buried treasure was revealed to him in a dream. A Spanish-looking ghost with the appearance of a conquistador with a cut throat, dripping with blood, appeared to him in a dream and revealed the location. Once again, the LDS folk, active members of the church that aren't familiar with this stuff, you need to read some of the diaries and accounts written in the day, including by family members, in order to know these things, because the church doesn't throw it in your Sunday school manuals. When he went to retrieve the treasure, he was unable to do so because it was guarded by a toad that shapeshifted into a man and forbade him from touching the treasure. I've read it. That's pretty much what it says. It doesn't use the word shapeshifted, but that's descriptive of what it says occurred, according to Joseph Smith. In reciting or retelling this to family and friends. It took him 2 to 3 years to overcome this obstacle. The shape-shifting toad, or other type of reptile, or amphibian, I suppose, is, of course, a familiar fixture in witchcraft and demonology. No doubt Christians will remember their own biblical story about what happened the last time someone talked to a reptile and received a gift from him in a certain garden. When Adam fell up by partaking. Okay. Scrying, the seer stones, peepstones, and the Urim and Thummim. Yeah, that's the Urim and Thummim. Trying to associate the stones from a breastplate with scrying is ridiculous. Cowdery tried to make it sound like a Urim and Thummim was a seer stone, which is not the case. Just to give it some kind of credibility and link it to the Bible. Smith told his followers that God gave him the power to translate the golden plates. The procedure he used to obtain his translation is called scrying. Typically, scrying is the process of looking into a crystal ball, a specially prepared magic mirror, an obsidian mirror, a bowl of water, or complete darkness in order to stimulate the power of second sight. Smith's method was to toss a seer stone, which was probably prepared through prayers and conjurations to spirits. I've actually read the spell casting to set apart a seer stone, who helped the conjurer to have visions, into a hat. This particular device was alleged to be chocolate-colored egg-shaped stone, which he had found on one occasion while digging. Actually, I believe Chase found it, and then Joseph asked if he could try it out, and then asked if he could take it home, and he would never give it back. He would put his face into the hat and begin his translation while his magical assistant, Oliver Cowdery, took down his words. So, although that went over pretty well as to explaining to the people of his day that that's how he translated the Book of Mormon, these stories disappeared along with the magic rock into the First Presidency vault. However, the fact that some people had seen it put enough pressure on the church that they finally said, okay, all right, here it is, and put it on LDS.org. So we've got the, brown egg-shaped stone, similar to the one that I've got. Now I haven't set it apart. I don't do that sort of thing. And it's normalized by LDS apologists and some of these folks on YouTube that are, putting out propaganda to mask the true occult nature of the church, and have actually compared it to a cell phone as a seer stone, such as Stephen, same name as this folks in Rancho Santa Fe, Smoot, with Book of Mormon Central. However, scrying is the same as crystal ball gazing, except for this is a solid stone, and I've shown that in some videos. Matter of fact, maybe I'll take a peek at that on here. Maybe I'll just go ahead and just throw some pics in. I'll just keep going here while I'm reading. All right, come back and do that, some editing maybe, huh? Similar procedures to this will be familiar to occultists in the pairing of Aleister Crowley with his Scarlet Woman and Queen Elizabeth's court, astrologer John Dee and his scryer Edward Kelly, who gave us the Enochian tablets and their corresponding angels. It's known that Joseph Smith practiced Enochian magic. As we'll see, many occultists are familiar with. Smith and his followers tried to equate this procedure with a device from the Old Testament called the Urim and Thummim, claiming that the angel Moroni gave him 2 seer stones which were designed for this purpose by God. Okay, I think we can actually blame that one on Oliver Cowdery, at least for publishing that sort of thing. Publishing is kind of Joseph Smith's thing. He was chief editor of the Times and Seasons, but Cowdery was authoring a lot of stuff, and yeah, he tried to say that the Urim and Thummim in the Old Testament breastplate used by Aaron when he would enter the tabernacle in the story was somehow equated with seer stones, which is absurd. But if you're ignorant, you'll fall for this kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, when we look in the scriptures, as we call them in the Book of Mormon, they are never called Urim and Thummim. Okay, like in either chapters 3 and maybe 12 or something, there's mention made of these 2 stones set in a silver bow, and the use of them is called seer. Actually, I may be confusing that with what's in the words there, with what's in some of the Joseph Smith history story, but yeah, they are mentioned there. There's also a mention in Alma, but it's not of 2 stones, it's just of 1, I believe. Alma or Messiah, and saying that gazing into it would, bring things that they'd done in secret to light. Okay, Edward Kelly and John Dee. They're kind of like Nostradamus here. All right. Smith and his followers tried to, interestingly, it will be noted that Edward Kelly convinced John Dee that in their relationship they had to share all things, including their wives, which Joseph Smith did with a number of couples sharing. Well, he got to share their wives. I don't think any of them got to share in Emma's sexuality, but apparently, the story goes, she kind of wanted William Law, who was a faithful married man to Jane Law, and it revealed what Joseph Smith was doing in the spiritual wife system in the Expositor. But Mormons are told that's a bunch of lies. And so Joe was he was justified in causing a riot and ordering the destruction of the press as the mayor, even though that's pretty much illegal, which is why he was in jail. Not because he wouldn't deny the Book of Mormon, as Jeffrey Holland said in a general conference talk, and began crying over it, or showing us that he was getting all teary-eyed about it when he knew absolutely 100% that he was lying. Joseph Smith had nothing, death, and neither did Hiram's have anything to do. They had nothing to do with refusing to deny the truth, as they call it, of the Book of Mormon. So Holland was using his NLP, making himself look like he was genuinely touched emotionally by something that he actually knew he was lying about. Hinckley's good at doing that too, or he was when he was alive. Smith and his followers tried to equate this procedure with a device from the Old Testament called Urim and Thummim, claiming that the angel Moroni gave him 2 seer stones which were designed for this purpose by the God of Israel. It says by God here. All right. Since no actual translation took place, it seems likely that Smith used a technique similar to automatic writing to come up with the Book of Mormon. Passages are strangely and poorly worded and sometimes unnecessarily repetitious in a pattern that he may have used to try to mimic the literary style of the Old Testament. I'm familiar with this because I studied the Old Testament thoroughly in a college course. Those occultists familiar with Ordo Templi Orientis, that's a secret society, that Aleister Crowley was a head of the Los Angeles chapter of, if chapter is a correct word, when he, as a 33rd degree Freemason, trained disciples such as Anton LaVey, another high-ranking Freemason who formed the Church of Satan there in LA, and a fellow by the name of L. Ron Hubbard, who was also a disciple of Aleister Crowley in OTO, who formed Scientology. Continuing, those occultists familiar with the Ordo Templi Orientis, or Orientalis, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Jimmy Page talks about that. Many people that get somewhere in this world are members of the Golden Dawn, deeply occult, and some 33rd degree Freemasons are involved with that. And similar occult organizations will quickly recognize some of the most common terminology used in the Book of Mormon. For example, the term Nephite is obviously neophyte in Mormonism. Nephites are the white and delightsome. This word in the Book of Mormon has been altered in recent years because of its racist overtones. Race of people in the Americas who are God's favorite people. In occult organizations, a neophyte is a lower degree initiate. This is what Smith himself was believed to be as a Mason, a lower degree initiate. Yeah, he became a Master Mason. That's the 3rd degree of the Blue Lodge. I've seen some Christians erroneously state that he was a 33rd degree Freemason, which would mean, the top of the Scottish Rite. And I've never seen anything to indicate he ever joined the Scottish Rite. It was March 15th and 16th. It says that he obtained those degrees in the Blue Lodge and was raised to the sublime level, or in other words, the degree of Master Mason. You've heard the term giving you the 3rd degree because we have some pretty terrifying death oaths, demonic death, blood oaths in those degrees. Well, we did until 1986 when one of the lords there in Britain said we were done with that. 4 years later, his subordinate, Gordon B. Hinckley, followed suit in the LDS endowment. The term Lamanite is recognized as a derivative of either laymen or layman in Mormonism. Lamanites are the dark-skinned evil people who are representatives of Satan on earth, who killed all but one of the Nephites named Moroni. Okay, so I'm going to comment there. He says all the dark-skinned people who are representatives of Satan on earth. That's not what the Book of Mormon says. It does say that their God cursed some of the Nephites to become dark-skinned, and then they were called Lamanites, meaning Laman and his brother Lemuel and the sons of Ishmael that hung out with those guys in the Book of Mormon fairy tale. So it says they were cursed with a dark skin, and it indicated that made them appear loathsome to the Nephites, in other words, ugly, because only white people are good-looking, according to the theme that is written into the Book of Mormon. And so the Nephites would not be enticed to marry and intermarry with the Lamanites and thus partake of their, apostasy, their ways, their traditions of their fathers, which were to not obey the God of Israel. So that's what it says. When this person is saying representatives of Satan on earth, I believe that it is likely that it is being referenced to that which President John Taylor, third president of the church, said when he was mentioning Negroes who are not Lamanites, they are Canaanites, the descendants of Cain through Ham, who married Egyptus, according to LDS and other theologies adopted by the church, possibly by followers of what's that gal's name? Anyway, she was out of Britain, and I think the Pratt brothers were involved in helping out there, as well as John Taylor, with the conversion of a lot of people. And her followers, they had the story of how Negroes came through the flood, and that's how it was. So that's how the God of Israel was justified in cursing Ham, or cursing his lineage, because he married a Negro woman, and that's where that comes from. Be wonderful if I could just recall the lady's name. I've mentioned it elsewhere. And so, Joseph Smith basically wrote that into the Book of Abraham, chapter 1. And John Taylor said that they came through basically for the purpose that the devil would have representation on earth. And he's referencing the Swedenborgian doctrines of the pre-mortal existence, and that these spirits have to come and live on earth, and that, these folks were, at that point, he's referencing them as representatives of the devil or of Satan. Later we have a little bit more on that from LDS prophets who are telling us that the Negroes were not valiant in the war in heaven. So in other words, they weren't entering into debates to tell people to follow the plan given by the pre-mortal Jesus, erroneously called, the whole things are bullshit in the first place, but Jehovah as a pre-mortal name, when that name was actually invented by a Catholic monk in the 13th century by the name of Raymond Martini, who gave us a Latinized version of portions of the name of the titles, which are not names. Joseph Smith kind of turned Elohim into a name, which means the gods, which is Hebrew for the gods, and Hebrew for my Lord is Adonai. And so he came up with Yehovah. Later, when the J and the V were invented, it turned into Jehovah. So there was no possibility of there being a Jehovah. But we find that, Tyndale started substituting this Jehovah business into the Bible instead of Adonai or, Yahweh or Elohim or anything of that nature. And Joseph Smith, in his ignorance, or those of whoever assisted and wrote what we've got in the Book of Mormon, put Jehovah in the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith put it in the Book of Abraham, saying, Abraham, Abraham. Of course, when he would have been called Abram, according to the story, he screwed that up too. My name is Jehovah, and I've come down here to save you, and to, waste this priest at the altar that wanted to take your life. That was all part of the phony Book of Abraham, which is filled with anachronisms and false information, along with, of course, the Egyptian alphabet being completely fraudulent that Joseph Smith created, and of course none of that corresponds to the papyri, which was out of the Book of Breathings and had nothing to do with Abraham, which Egyptologists were able to go ahead and translate and find that Joseph Smith made it all up because he thought no one would ever, in his day at least, be able to translate Egyptian, but he was wrong. All right, they were already translated in France, but hadn't gotten to the New World yet. Anyway, it didn't affect Joe's life too much. But now it's been the cause of the reorganized church, or the community of Christ, to actually throw away the Book of Abraham, admitting it was fraud. Yeah. Okay, I mentioned that to a missionary recently that we had over for dinner. Those occultists familiar with Ordo Templi Orientis and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and similar occult organizations will quickly recognize some of the most common terminology used in the Book of Mormon. Okay, the term Lamanite recognized as the derivative of layman. In Mormonism, Lamanites are the dark-skinned evil people, blah, blah, blah. Nephites and Moroni, whose story is at the center of the fictional Book of Mormon. The Masonic term for those who are not members of their organization is called laymen. Masonic history is full of stories about battles between Masons, neophytes, and laymen. The Book of Mormon is a story of a battle between good, godly white Nephites and dark-skinned, complected, evil Lamanites. Yeah, that's pretty much true. Occultists will recognize laymen as the name for a special medallion that functions as an energy storehouse for ceremonial magicians and helps them to bridge their connection to the spirits. It is also used in secret societies so that one member will recognize another. In Mormonism, the temple garments, or holy underwear, or magic underwear is what I hear more people saying, perform a similar function in that they allow members to recognize other members in good standing, depending on what you're wearing. And now that's been changed. You're not going to see people wearing garments. You're not going to see, the emblems through a thin white shirt or blouse anymore, because they're going to be on the inside and not stitched in, but silk screened in, so that members know they got them, but it's not as known to the public. The name Mormon appears to be related to the Greek god Mormo, according to Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible. Mormo is the king of the ghouls, consort of Hecate in Greek mythology. Mormo was a spirit who bit bad children, said to have been a companion of the goddess Hecate. You know, it's funny. Joseph Smith was asked, if I'm reciting this correctly, that, and I heard Gordon B. Hinckley say it. He didn't give explanation. Anyway, you know, more means more, right, in English, and mon means good in Egyptian, said Joseph Smith. So he said it just means more good. So, yeah, the name was made up from half from English, which didn't exist at the time, at least especially not to Nephites, and mon from Egyptian. That's right, and that's what Gordon B. Hinckley tells us too, when he was saying how nice it is just to say, you know, call us Mormons, to call people Mormons. That it's a nice complimentary thing. We're just saying more good, said Gordon B. Hinckley. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. He was so ignorant in that. Anyway, of course, now Nelson tells us that you know, to be called anything but a Latter-day Saint is giving, you know, glory to Satan or something like that. So we've seen those contrasts between what Nelson, in his rebranding effort, is saying, that pretty much condemns what Hinckley said when he said, you know, it's good to be known as Mormons. We'd like them to call us Latter-day Saints, but it's fine to be called Mormons. They marketed a lot of LPs under the title of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, but now that's just giving glory to Satan. So who was leading Hinckley? Nelson. Continuing on. Throughout the Book of Mormon, other strange references to the proceedings of occult orders exist. These things would not have been known by the public, and those in Masonic orders were sworn to secrecy on penalty of death, just as Mormons were until, it says 1991, I believe it was April of 1990 when the endowment was changed. So Smith's fraud would be impenetrable. But in the late 19th century, the rituals of such orders were all exposed by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and anyone can go and read about them for themselves and compare them to the rituals of the Church and the terms used in the Book of Mormon. Well, I know that Captain William, they call him Captain, I don't know that he was a captain, William Morgan, we see Captain Morgan Whiskey in Salt Lake. We got to edit one of those. I took a picture. There's Captain Morgan Whiskey, and there's Porter Rockwell Whiskey. And he was murdered because he was revealing signs and tokens of Freemasonry. His widow became one of Joseph Smith's consorts, although she had remarried Brother Harris, with whom the Smiths stayed, and she, Sister Harris, the widow of Captain Morgan, said, sure, I've been Joseph Smith's consort, or, excuse me, his mistress for these 3 years. You should do it too. Speaking with the wife of Apostle Orson Pratt, Sarah Pratt, who did not accept Joseph Smith's adulterous advances and stated that he was the most lascivious man she had ever met, and Brigham the most bloodthirsty. She divorced her polygamous husband eventually in Utah, the apostle. And she also said John C. Bennett was performing abortions for Joseph Smith. John C. Bennett was quickly brought into the first presidency after helping Joseph Smith get the Nauvoo Charter. Yeah. Once again, we find that business really helps bring people up in the church quickly. You can look at some of the resumes of guys like Dallin Oaks and see what a spiritual leader he wasn't. CEO of PBS, involved with Continental Bank, as a fellow that my wife believes was involved in targeting me with witchcraft, who was a large-scale mover and shaker international banker that I met on a very secluded beach many years ago. Okay, anyhow, let's continue. Yeah, he started his career there at Continental Bank, where John Bystrom says a lot of criminal activity takes place there in Illinois with the Mormon Mafia. John Bystrom's got some interesting things to say about that. When I was a member of this organization, the Urim and Thummim was a point of minor discussion and something that many members wondered about because it seemed unclear. But no one bothered to actually research this minor detail because it didn't seem like a major point. According to numerous researchers, there are multiple seer stones in Smith's family, or Anne Smith's family, who were all involved in witchcraft, commonly carried and used such stones, even keeping them in little pouches or mojo bags. Excuse me. Got too much Spanish in my head. That would, actually I really don't, sure how you're supposed to pronounce that. That would be very familiar to modern witches. Well, I could show one of those. Oh well, I've got one right there, as a matter of fact, to keep my seer stones in. A number of people, yeah, I got it from a nice little witchcraft shop there in Salt Lake City. Although I got the seer stones from Dave's Health and Nutrition in Salt Lake City. A number of people, including modern witches, report seeing these peep stones. The stone was not chocolate brown, but rather the color of brown sugar. It was 3 to 4 inches long, 2 inches wide, and had a hump in the middle, which made it perhaps 2 inches thick at the thickest point. It was flat on the bottom and had 3 black concentric circles on the top. Below the circles were many small black circles. The stone was not transparent. This was taken from Mary Brown Firmage interview with Richard S. Van Wagner, August 11th, 1986, Van Wagner Papers, Marriott Library. Continuing, historian Grant Palmer claims to have seen 3 such seer stones kept in a vault at the office of the First Presidency. This is the office of the Mormon prophet and his 2 highest advisors. He described the first one as milk chocolate, like a baseball, no stripes. The second one as a shiny polished stone with stripes, dark brown, size between egg and handball, and the third as simply a small stone. The above descriptions are hardly in accordance with what one would expect the Urim and Thummim, the gemstones from the breastplate of an Egyptian pharaoh, to look like. But clearly, if Smith received translations and revelations in this way, it may honestly be said by occultists that he spoke with the power of God, as we understand this force as the Tetragrammaton and 4 and 5 elements, the 72 names of God, which are both angels and demons. But this complex God concept is not easily equated to the fairly simple concept of God generally held by Christians, who see, quote-unquote, him as one or a benevolent anthropomorphic being. Benevolent means they haven't read the scriptures very carefully, like Numbers chapter 31, for instance, much of Genesis and Joshua. Leviticus too, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, as a benevolent anthropomorphic being. From the perspective of any Christian, Smith was a witch who communicated with spirits who were most decidedly not of the Lord, and therefore of the devil or Satan. Okay, let me comment there again. So this seer stone business, Joseph Smith was a scryer. He used seer stones to, whether he was fraudulently doing this or an actual magician, throwing it in his hat so in the darkness he could see visions in it, to direct people to various things, various treasures, not just buried pirate treasure guarded by demons, but just general things that people lost, like even their cow or their chicken, whom some seem to think Joseph may have had something to do with causing them to disappear in order to build his reputation. The use of these divination arts are definitely founded in the occult, and even on LDS.org, in the Bringing Forth of the Book of Mormon essay on gospel topics essays, which can easily be found if you go to the bottom of any page and find them in the site map, even though you have to sift through and go jump through some hoops, so you're not just caught in the featured ones about Heavenly Mother and Are Mormons Christian and all that sort of thing. The ones they don't want you to see unless you're already aware of the 9 versions of the first vision, or the fraud of the Book of Abraham, or the bringing forth of the Book of Mormon through occult means. I recently saw something called the Lucy Code, a presentation by a gentleman who's done quite a bit of studies regarding early Mormon history and Joseph Smith's practices and so forth, and the occult. And he believes that it was Hiram and Lucy Mack and Joseph Sr. who were responsible for much, if not all, and Oliver Cowdery perhaps, one book of the Book of Mormon, thus accounting for various writing styles, and those people were all better educated than Joseph Smith was. And that Joseph Smith had a fantastic photographic memory, as some people do, and then just simply memorized a few pages. And then on the occasions that he and Oliver Cowdery were putting on this dog and pony show there in the Whitmer family home, where Joseph Smith was sticking his head in the hat, looking at his seer stone, and then dictating passages for the Book of Mormon. So, you know, at any rate, we know that we've got all kinds of plagiarism in the Book of Mormon. We've got passages, many passages, straight out of the King James Bible, the very version, word for word, that Joseph Smith's family had, including known mistranslations, which have been fixed in sometimes in subsequent editions, and including passages which he later corrected in the inspired version of the Bible, corrected as we call it, retranslated, telling us that the great and abominable church of the devil, the church described in chapter 13 of 1 Nephi, which Brigham Young and Orson Pratt have clearly told us is the Catholic Church, he put them directly as they were in the King James Bible into the Book of Mormon, and later said that the devil had inspired the corrupting of the Bible through his great and abominable church, and made those verses read what he said was the actual correct and inspired Word of God in the inspired version, or Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. So how did the corrupt verses, the corrupt version of these verses, get into the Book of Mormon is the obvious concern. And if you got a little more than double-digit IQ, the answer is not that hard to find. Same reason we've got, stuff out of the book called A View of the Hebrews, written by the pastor of Oliver Cowdery, Joe's cousin, distant cousin. His pastor was Ethan Smith, who wrote that book, and some of it is in the Book of Mormon. We also have portions of a book called The Late War Between Great Britain and the United States, even so far as mentioning the 4th of July in the Book of Mormon. Yeah, and it came to pass in the 4th day of the 7th month. Yeah, I think that's in the 3rd Nephi. Anyway, that's a good one. Love that one. 4th of July. And that's straight out of that book, as are numerous other passages, but the 4th of July was especially interesting to find these plagiarisms stuffed into the Book of Mormon, including, of course, things that supposedly Babylonian captivity would have prevented the Nephites from having, because they left Jerusalem in the story before some of the book of Isaiah was written that happens to be in the Book of Mormon. Oops. All right. Then again, Joe copied business out of Genesis into the Book of Abraham, which had the anachronistic reference to the Chaldeans being there at the time of the alleged Abraham, about 2000 BC, when they weren't there until about like 900 BC. Oops. Okay, let's keep going. The temple ceremony. The temple ceremony. In Mormonism, there are wards, which are regular churches, and then there are temples. Churches are for ordinary services and meetings, but only certain members are permitted to enter the temple. We know what that is. People that pass temple recommend interviews, including the payment of tithing. Certain other things. And the behavioral control mechanisms of mind control in the church, having to do with the law of chastity, as it is called, which law never existed, and the word of wisdom, which Joseph and Brigham certainly didn't obey. Okay. The endowment ceremony is one of the most telling and bizarre aspects of Mormonism. It is the ceremony that only worthy Mormons who have paid their tithes and are living clean lifestyles, as it is called, no extra or premarital relations, coffee, tea or alcohol consumption, etc., are allowed to participate in this ceremony, that they receive their temple garments in, known to the outside world as holy underwear, or, as I would say, magic underwear, since it is obviously functioning as a magical talisman in protecting people from demons and harm, or the power of the destroyer, as it was literally spoken, as they gave me my garments. The endowment ceremony is similar to the rituals performed by Wiccan covens, non-Wiccan witch covens that have initiatory rites, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Rosicrucians, and other similar types of organizations. The Church vehemently denies that the rituals are derived from Freemasonry, although they are nearly identical right down to the green apron. Might also mention that they were introduced into the endowment, the Masonic signs, tokens, and penalties. Penalties are now gone. About 7 weeks after Joseph Smith rose to the level of Master Mason. What a coincidence. So he got them from God, but not until he learned them from the Masons a few weeks earlier. Yeah, I believe that. No, I don't. That was one of the things that caused me to look more carefully at LDS history and at the Book of Mormon, and I began to see all sorts of contradictions, and contradictions with logic, as well as contradictions right within the LDS scriptures, with Jesus saying one thing and then saying another. Like, for instance, where in the Book of Mormon he tells, Ether chapter 3, verses 9 and 15, he tells the brother of Jared that he's the first guy to ever see him, the only person to ever have enough faith to see the Lord. And, 1,000 years, maybe about 11 years earlier in biblical chronology, we find in chapter 7 of Joseph Smith's later published Book of Moses, which was the retranslation of Genesis, we find that Enoch spoke face to face with this same Lord as one man speaketh with another, except it was 1,000 years, to the anachronistic side of the statement made in Ether chapter 3. Oops, Jesus lied. Okay, it is also widely known that Smith was a Freemason, although in the 1980s, when I was still a member, I'm reading, this is not me, this was vehemently denied, and members were discouraged from learning anything about the Masons. And my bishop said, yeah, Joseph Smith was a Mason, before I went to the temple, because it was a concern of mine at that point, since I'd been in the Masonic temple, and retrieved tables and chairs there for my wedding and reception. And because the LDS Church janitor told me he, I don't know, I couldn't take all of those there. So I thought he might have given us a few chairs, but they had something else going on there at the church that night or something. That fateful Friday night. But since my fiance at that time was the reigning queen of the Job's daughters, meaning her father had to be a master mason, she pretty much got her way, and we went to the Masonic temple, where they informed us that they used to share the building with the Mormons. And I think the LDS Church sold it to them, or they rented to the LDS Church. I don't remember exactly the details on that, but they were the Mormon, ward and the Masonic lodge were both being housed at this Masonic temple. And I wasn't real comfortable with the evidence of continuing relationship between Mormons and Masonry, which became more disturbing when I was reading a different book about who runs things through secret societies. It was not about Mormonism, and mentioned the penalties being dropped in 1986 from the Blue Lodge. Those horrendous blood oaths about ripping out your tongue, having your throat sliced, your heart ripped out, all that kind of stuff from Freemasonry, and knowing that it had been dropped 4 years later by Gordon B. Hinckley. And, of course, receiving the grip of the Master Mason by a friend who was a drunk Freemason at that moment, told me he wasn't supposed to reveal that, and I'd already been to the temple, and I said, what is that? He said, it's something from Masonry that I'm not supposed to show you. This has changed in recent years, continuing, and there is a more open relationship between the Mormons and Freemasons. Although the reason for the change is not clear, quite possibly it is because the internet information age has made it impossible for them to keep some of their most embarrassing secrets. The ceremony involves the washing and anointing of every body part you have while you are in a state of undress. Okay, let's clarify that. Although that was true long ago, and people were scrubbed naked in a tub filled with whiskey-scented water, as people have attested to, and it gradually changed. I believe Grant Palmer or Richard Packham has talked about their experience, which involved severe nakedness and scrubbing. And I've heard of people being touched in sensitive areas with the washing and anointing ceremony since then, I believe, and deliberately longer ago. When I went there, which was in the 80s originally, we did have the blood oaths being represented, but not spoken, with regard to having your tongue ripped out, your throat slit, your heart ripped out, vitals, all this kind of stuff. When I read the Masonic oaths, I clearly recognized what we were pantomiming, and I was horrified. However, we were not speaking those oaths, although those were spoken previously in the LDS endowment. And so far as that state of undress, yeah, you did have to take off all your clothes and put on this poncho with a slit up the sides, which was not at all modest. So I would hold the poncho together when I was walking around there in the temple previous to receiving those washing and anointing ordinances, in which you are touched on your head, your nose, and your lips. Yeah, lips with the same stuff that's, same finger that are touching other people's body, but stick your hand in your mouth at least, for goodness sakes. And when they say, we bless your loins that you may be fruitful and multiply, etc. When I did it, they were not touching any sensitive areas, but that was done on your lower back. So that's done with both water, and then in the next booth, or going through a veil to the next portion of the booth, it's done with oil, which has been set apart, just like you set apart a seer stone in witchcraft. The temples are dedicated, just like in Masonry, and things are dedicated, set apart, consecrated. These are all, terms we hear in the occult, witchcraft, Freemasonry, that sort of thing. Remember when I saw Joseph Smith's journal, and he said, Brother Brigham and I attended a temple dedication, a Masonic temple dedication today. And I thought, gosh, that sounds so familiar. So many things are very familiar. The more you learn about the occult, the more you recognize it in Mormonism, and the language from Freemasonry. I was reading out of the Royal Arch degree. I was reading Mormonism. Okay, let's keep going. The Order of Melchizedek and all that stuff. Okay, so you are naked, but you have this poncho on. Now they just give you a garment you'd put on by yourself instead of having, someone in the priesthood slip it on you. I guess the women have their own little priesthood emulation there. They're set apart to do this in their booths. So you're stepping into a garment, wearing basically a mini skirt with slits up the side, and feeling kind of weird about it once you get your garments on. I used to feel a whole lot more secure. I didn't like parading around in that state of undress, but didn't have anybody try to ring the bell or anything. But I've heard of people that it's really that occurring. Okay, so involves the washing and anointing of every body part you have while you are in a state of undress. At least this is how it was when I was a member. Says this person, the rituals are changed frequently, especially in the past few years, as their blood oaths became the subject of public controversy. Also, women supposedly complaining about, touching that went on that they didn't like at the veil, when embracing the brother who was representing the Lord through the veil in the 5 points of fellowship. I mentioned once that in an endowment session, a voice spoke to me and told me to Google the 5 points of fellowship. This was long after that was taken out of the endowment. When I did, it said nothing about Mormonism. It was all Freemasonry regarding the legend of Hiram Abiff. These ceremonies have a truly satanic feel. Many of us witches do not join covens because some orders engage in similar practices. Most Mormons have no idea what they're in for when they go to these things. At least my parents had no idea that they were being inducted, bum rush style, into a cult with distinct satanic overtones. The procedure is traumatizing, sometimes sexually traumatizing, for Mormons who have been conditioned to extreme sexual repression and told, let no one touch your body except your husband or wife. Furthermore, sexual assault survivors and survivors of SRA, satanic ritual abuse, see the PACE memo, are often triggered by the sexual nature of the ceremony. Bishop Glenn Pace did mention in his memo to the Strengthening the Church Members Committee that many people's first flashbacks to repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse did occur while they were in the LDS temple. Yeah, okay. Continuing, anyone who has studied occult initiations thoroughly knows that trauma, including sexual trauma, is sometimes employed in order to open up certain spiritual doorways in the mind of the initiate. These initiations are repeated as the initiate proceeds down the path of knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. Sexual and psychological trauma is also a fixture of the MK Ultra mind control program. Well, from what I understand, the CIA actually brought Satanists in to help teach them trauma-based mind control techniques to use in the MK Ultra mind control program and its various projects, which were developed, such as Project Monarch, that I referenced in the video I did a couple days ago on satanic ritual abuse, pedophilia, and so forth in the LDS Church, and why it's actually covered up so effectively through the network, just as the Catholics and JWs succeed in doing so well. Even though so many priests are known to be pedophiles in the Catholic Church, the amount of cover-up that's gone on is just completely mind-boggling in all of these churches. And cooperation that they get within the legal system, as it's called, on our plantations, called states, cities, counties, and nations. Also, in organizations like the Masons and the Mormons, it binds the initiate to the organization, not only through the swearing of oaths and allegiances, the giving of secret handshakes and spiritual names as well. All of these things, including handshakes and so-called sacred names, sacred secrets, are given to the neophyte in the initial endowment ceremony. All right. How much more do I have here? Holy garments. The temple garments are holy underwear. I may have to do a part 2. Pace memo. Personal experience. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to part 2 this and get on with some other things I probably want to accomplish for now. Luciferianism and Kolob. Yeah, this is quite an article. Once again, it's found on lifestylesofthetraditionalwitch.wordpress.com, written by a former active member of the church. Mormon Truth Videos Gospel Topics Hubs, where you're going to find a lot of information written and also many videos that are placed categorically in the appropriate pages pertaining to LDS truth and authority claims, so you can actually do what the Bible says, prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. Not that I believe the Bible to be a terrific thing, but hey, if you're LDS, you're supposed to believe the Bible is true, at least whatever Joseph Smith says is true. And the character Paul from the New Testament tells us we need to prove all things. So let's look at the evidence like we would at any other church. And when we find the contradictions, the historical rewriting, and the cover-ups, and the continued dishonesty in the gospel topics essays, the mind control techniques used, and the obvious training in NLP and hypnotic language by various general authorities, it's eye-opening. And liberating when you get your Sunday back and a 10% raise. In the name of the Age of Reason, Dodger Game Out. Visit my website. Subscribe to my channels. Hit the bell so you can get the notifications of new uploads and, things to help spread this, share it, like it, all that good stuff. Those things help get truth out to more people. And you kind of have to recheck and make sure you're still subscribed, because you know what? YouTube tends to eliminate that for some of us that discuss topics they don't want us to discuss as openly or correctly as I try to do. Because if we understand corporate governorship, then we understand who controls Google.